Very much a product of studying abroad, as his path to Japan began in the year 1989 when he studied abroad at the University of Amsterdam. He also serves as the director of Musashi University's East Asian Studies program and is involved directly in partnership building, student recruitment, and curriculum development, as well as academic and personal advising on students in the program. In addition, he has developed and coordinated immersive learning experiences. A passionate advocate for learning and a staunch believer in the potential of his students. Ladies and gentlemen, help me welcome, as we put our hands together for our second speaker, the Associate Professor of Global Studies in the Faculty of Liberal Arts and Sciences in Musashi University, Japan. We have here today Associate Professor Dr. Brian J. Masshardt.
Okay, well, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. As you were going through, I caught myself saying, "Who is this person? Is that who I am?" But I really appreciate that, and it's wonderful to be here. Good morning. Some of you are still in the morning. I am actually in the afternoon, so apologies if you hear my stomach growling. I'm really hungry, actually. But we'll try to keep that down. And maybe even good evening for some of you. We are live streaming around the world, and I even sent this link to my mother. So, Mom, if you're watching, hi, how are you doing? But it's just a pleasure to be here, and this invitation really humbling and an honor to be on this panel with the two other esteemed educators, Dr. Majid and Dr. Wayudin. We've not met in person, but hello, and I hope we do meet in person someday, because it would be wonderful to be able to see you wherever you are. Students as well, thank you so much for organizing this. And of course, with all of the universities involved, I know it's a lot for coordination and coming together, but it's really come together nicely, and I'm looking forward to sharing my thoughts, some ideas with you along the way. So I'm going to share my screen and get into the, okay. Okay, I hope everything is okay and you can see it and hear me. If not, please don't hesitate to speak up. Don't wait until I've gone 3 or 4 slides and say, by the way, we couldn't see those first 4 slides. Okay, so just jump in and interrupt me at any time. It's okay. It was really hard to try to come up with a title, and hence this idea of you title the talk. So I'm putting the responsibility on you to do this after you listen to me. I will be sending a Google form link to the organizers, and I would love to hear your ideas on what you feel that this talk should have been about. Because I'm getting up there in age, and I'm teaching a lot, got a lot of responsibilities. I have 2 teenagers at home, a couple of cats. And there's just a lot of times that I forget things. And, I'm even to the point where I can only remember 25 letters in the alphabet. I don't know why. So thank you again. And really, congratulations for putting together this talk. It's been a wonderful experience. And that's the end. That's another joke. Sorry about that. We'll keep moving. Hopefully you're laughing and perking up, like, what's this guy doing to us here? So I have four sections to go through here. What's my story? Because I feel that, you have to be prepared to tell your story. Everybody has stories, and they're interesting, and we need to share. We need to share and get to know each other through that way. But we have a variety of backgrounds, right? So I'm going to hopefully provide 3 three ways, three aspects in which that maybe we can find some common ground. I'm sure there's many more, but I don't have time to tell you all of those, okay? I do have some questions that I'd like you to consider, and maybe rather than asking me questions at the end, you want to give me your answers to your questions. So there's no homework. I'm not going to try to grade you, but if you want to engage those questions, feel free to share your thoughts after I've finished speaking. In addition, I'm sure when you get together in your breakout rooms and have a chance to chat, that these may come up. And please keep in mind, you don't have to have an answer today. It's fine, right? I mean, these are some of the questions that will evolve over time. You know, you're not going to get the immediate feedback. There's no short-term gain, for example, or goal on answering these questions, but maybe in the midterm or a long range, you know, after you've been out teaching for a couple of years or 10 years or 20 years or as many years as I've been out there, you will see the evolution, right? And the way in which that these questions will connect to you at that point in time, based on all of the experiences that you've had, all of the knowledge that you've gained, the new contexts that you've appreciated. Okay, so these are not static in any way. You know, they will evolve with you, and maybe your 21-year-old self will not answer the same way as your 54-year-old self would answer. Okay, so these are questions not just for today, but file them away, seeds in your mind, and maybe they'll come up again at some point. And then finally, I want to share some educational strategies, as Dr. Majid did. And I was very encouraged, actually, in listening to her presentation, which was fascinating and wonderful. And thank you so much for that. And you know, we didn't coordinate at all, but and I think this is the beauty of doing these types of experiences. But I think you'll see some connections, and this reinforcement is always very important, that we hear a similar message in a different way from different people, and it helps it become ours, right? It helps us take it in and help us understand and be able to utilize it in our teaching classrooms, right? So let me go ahead, tell you a little bit about my story. I know you don't have 54 years, you know, to share about what I've done. We have maybe 20 more minutes to go, but let me give you a little bit of context of how a Midwestern boy ended up in Japan. So this is where I was born and raised, right? Well, not actually in that farm, okay, but around this area. I'm from a state called Wisconsin, and don't worry, no pop quiz, geography. You know, where is Wisconsin on a map? Actually, many Americans don't know where Wisconsin is on the map, so it's fine. We're okay with that from the Midwest. We're often overlooked and underappreciated, but we know ourselves and we appreciate each other. But rolling hills, right? Cows and farms and all of those smells that go along with cows and farms. But you know, it keeps you, it gives you energy, actually. But transitioning from this, the blue skies, the beautiful clouds, rolling hills, the silos of grain, to here, to Tokyo, the silos that house people, not grain. And again, Mom, if you're listening, watching, I always refer to my mother in this, because when I show her this picture and ask her, would you like to come to Tokyo, Mom? She says, absolutely no way. She was born and raised on a farm, and it was literally a mile from her house to the mailbox that she walked every morning. They lived back in a valley. She walked to school. And so, you know, seeing this, and, you know, again, my context, my deep background, my self-concept based in that rural setting of Wisconsin, and coming and trying to negotiate and navigate here while I'm in Tokyo, right? So in that way, maybe I pose a question to you in this way. What values come from a place like this, right? What do you imagine? And that imagination is very important, right? We have to engage that, not only and encourage that with our students, but with ourselves as well, right? You need to be imaginative, right? And a little bit later, I'll share some of my strategies that I've used to keep that imagination flowing, right? So again, I'm imagining that that rural country road is quite a bit different from where you live, although there may be some similarities, right? We may share some similarities. Rolling hills, right? The ruralness of the area. And oftentimes, maybe individuals with that type of same context, that rural versus urban, often get a little bit greater connection in that way, because there is a commonness to that. There's a universalness to that, right? That's reminds me of a story when I was once traveling in Japan many years ago, and I had traveled down to the southwestern part of Japan, very rural area, and I was waiting for a train. And trains don't come very often in rural Japan, unlike Tokyo, where you can get one about every 5 to 7 minutes in some cases. And I was chatting with an elderly woman. It was towards the end of the day, and just struck up a nice conversation with her. She offered me a nice mikan, and it's a small Japanese orange, very, very delicious. And she asked me where I'm from. And I said, well, I came from Tokyo, right? And she said, oh, well, Tokyo. And she said the words in Japanese, but basically she said to her, again, coming from this rural area, she said, wow, Tokyo is so dangerous and so dirty. And I was like, wow, this is quite interesting. It gets into this understanding, particularly that often happens when people think about Japan as a small country, as a homogeneous country, that there are tremendous differences, and that those connections that we can make as humans, those universal connections, again, going back to the urban rural environments, can really produce meaningful dialogue and understanding. And so even though I didn't speak that language very well, I felt her heart, right? I felt a closer connection to her, and maybe she felt a little more safer with me because I also explained where I was from in a small rural area. Okay, so what are some things that we can agree on today? And I hope that maybe there are 3 things. First of all, this idea of fundamental norms, right? And this comes from communication scholars, Christians and Traber, a book that was published probably before many of you were even born, but on communication ethics and universal values. And they have 3. So one is the value of truth, okay? The second would be respect for another's dignity. And the third, expectation that innocent should not suffer harm, right? So these would be the 3 norms that I would hope that we could have some, common grounding on: the value of truth, respect for another's dignity, and the expectation that innocent should not suffer harm. All right. So that's one set of commonness that I hope we have. A second is the ways that we learn, right? I think we all are of the mindset and understanding as teachers that not everybody learns the same. And if some of you are familiar with the work of Howard Gardner, this comes from his work and just trying to understand the multiple ways. He frames it as intelligence, but it's also multiple ways of learning, and how necessary that is to understand that in the classroom setting. You may have a student, for example, who is better equipped to draw out, right, and to produce thoughts in different ways than just simply writing a text. Okay, you have people who are more athletic, for example, or more musical, and so on. It's right in front of you. I don't need to go through everything, and again, this will be made available so you can have an opportunity to explore this more for yourself, for those who aren't familiar with it. And I also have the link at the bottom. Okay, so again, I hope this is another commonness that we can agree on, that there are multiple ways of learning. And then finally, I hope that we can also agree that there are multiple ways to envision the futures. And that's not a spelling mistake. Actually, part of my training at the University of Hawaii was in the field of what's known as futures studies. And this is, again, one of the reasons why it was really difficult for me to kind of boil down the essence and give you 30 minutes of me versus 2.5 hours of me, because I am really excited about and engaged and even passionate about futures studies. And, to just keep it simple, the way in which that we understand the futures and why it's plural. It's plural because of this, right? It's plural because we all have multiple ways to think about things. There's not just one future, the future, right? And I always get, it's like, I don't know if you know what chalkboards are, but when you take your fingernails and scratch them on the chalkboard, it's just a sound that some people just, oh, I don't like that. To me, whenever I see titles of books like The Future of Education or The Future of Japan, I don't throw it away, but I am a little disappointed that the author feels that there's just one way forward, because there's absolutely not. And so when we talk about, for example, what can or could be, so we talk about the possible, what is likely to be, the probable, and then what ought to be, and that's the preferable. And I should make an amendment to my earlier comment about the future, because actually maybe that's what the future is, our preferred future, right? We can talk about possible futures and probable futures, but we may have a preferred future. However, understanding that preferred future is also going to change over time as our worldview changes and expands, as we get new experiences, right? And gain, again, like I said earlier, more knowledge. Our preferences are going to change. And so that preferred future of 21-year-old or 18-year-old or 16-year-old Brian back in Wisconsin is much different than 54-year-old Brian, right? So just keeping that in mind. Look, this is very, very, very Cliff Note style introduction to future studies. But anybody who's interested in knowing more about it, certainly send me an email. I can give you plenty to read and be engaged with, okay? Because it does have a lot of relevance to the way in which we want to envision, right? The way that we are teachers, right? Okay, so those are the three things that I see as a way for us to have some commonness as we go through the next few minutes here, right? So questions, right? Again, for your consideration, but also for your reconsideration, whenever you want to do it, okay? So first question, right? Are you prepared to be wrong? Second question, do you want to come up with something original? Third question, do you want to be right, or do you want to get it right? And the last one, do you want to learn, or do you want to know? Okay. So again, this will be available, but if you have a pen or in a piece of paper, it's always good to write things down. It stimulates your thinking in a different way rather than just getting on the phone and typing things in. Highly encourage you, if you don't, to write a lot. That really brings out, I think, a depth and a greater appreciation of the ideas that you have. So again, file those away for your consideration, okay? So let me get through to some educational strategies. And don't worry, this is not anything really intellectual or deep. It's a lot of experience, basically, right? A lot of experience, much more, I guess, gut than mind in many senses, right? It's a way in which that you try to negotiate and navigate. And it's really based on all the lessons that I've learned for the past 50 some odd years, okay? And so I like acronyms. As a political scientist, they're necessary because you get all of these very long, drawn out names, right? And it's just kind of nice to come up with acronyms. And sometimes I come up with really interesting acronyms. Other times I just take the first letter of each word and put it together, and you can try to figure it out. So I'm not going to give you, don't worry, I'm not going to test you like, what do you think this is or whatnot. But what I'm saying, and look, this is not, it's not a prescription, right? It's very much how you may see them relevant to you, right? And I may share a few stories along the way of how I see this relating to how I teach and how I interact. But I very much encourage you to think about how it pertains to your experience, right? And also encourage you to think of your own, right? Come up with your own original thinking. So the first one, right? PBW. Comes from a quote of an educator that I really respect and really have enjoyed. His name, Sir Ken Robinson. I don't know if you've heard of him. Unfortunately, well, like all of us, he passed away a couple of years ago now, but his words and images live on. He's done a number of TED Talks. He's got some great books out. And I really, really have enjoyed the way that he thinks. And this quote, again, is something that I kind of live with every day. If you're not prepared to be wrong, you'll never come up with anything original. And so this is where PBW comes from. Prepare to be wrong. Prepare to be wrong, right? The second one, you could say it, I guess, as UFAR, if that works for you. And this comes from my professor back at the University of Hawaii, Dr. James Dater, who's had a tremendous influence on my academic and intellectual development, particularly when it comes to future studies. And he has a fabulous quote that I use all the time with my students, that any useful idea about the future should appear to be ridiculous, right? I was thinking, how would this apply to me? And I thought, if I go back in a time travel and go back to Brian when he was in the 5th grade at Northside Elementary School in Monroe, Wisconsin. And he had a creative writing exercise. And I've had a couple of opportunities to share what I wrote. I won't share that with you today, but if the time traveler comes back to me in, what was that, 1978 or 79, I was in 5th grade, and said, in 2022, on October 21st, you're going to be standing in front of a camera in Japan and being broadcasted around the world, talking about what you feel passionate about, and that's education. Probably the first words would have not been ridiculous. It may have been, get out of here. But I'm sure I would have felt that that's a very ridiculous idea. And yet here we are, right? And so this, again, is so critical when it comes to those envisioning, not just of, preferred futures and that, but teaching as well. I think I would encourage you to be ridiculous, right? Come up with these strange ideas, try them out, right? Experiment, especially early on, okay? You can learn lessons from that. The third one, BCWN, okay? And this one is be comfortable with no, all right? I think as teachers, we're always expected to say yes. And that's not a really good strategy to survive, okay? To be honest, you are going to be overwhelmed at times. You are going to have moments of despair, okay? And why did I choose this, okay? Because you're going to take in too much. That's the nature of the teacher. She takes in too much, and it becomes hard after a while, right? So you really need to put your guard up for yourself. Health is absolutely critical, right? If you're not healthy, you're not teaching. You're not leaving your house. You're not able to get out and interact, right? So this idea with being comfortable with no, meaning that you are comfortable to say that, okay? Now, of course, it's going to matter how you say it. Student comes up to you and says, hey, can I do? No, you can't do that. Obviously use your communication skills, but there are going to be times you're going to have to say no. You're also going to have to be comfortable hearing no from others, right? And you're going to have to be comfortable saying no to yourself. Some of us, and I still have trouble with this. I really do. I have trouble saying no. And I know that that's, in some ways, that becomes your strength. And we often know that, right? Our strengths are often our weaknesses, okay? Because sometimes I do take on too much. But I've got to learn to say no. And hopefully that's one thing that you'll learn to do earlier in your teaching career. But it's hard. It is really hard to say no. But you've got to be comfortable with it. You do. Okay. This one, eTune, I guess we could name it. Expect the unexpected. And this is more for one of the messages that I deliver to my students when I start class every semester. The first class is, look, I'm kind of a spontaneous person. The field that I teach in with global studies and international relations, it's going on, right? It's going on around us. North Korea, for example, continues to launch missiles, all right, in and around this area, okay? If something major happens in world events, 30 minutes before I'm ready to teach class, but I've got a prepared lecture to do. I think we're going to talk about what's just happening right now. We can do the lecture later, okay? Sometimes, for example, I'll have friends who are in Tokyo on research or on business or whatever, and I'll throw it out to them. Hey, I've got a class tomorrow. You want to come in and say something? And sometimes people say yes. Sometimes they say no, but sometimes they say yes. And so I'll walk in on that day and students will have an idea that, well, we're supposed to have a lecture or we're supposed to do this. And I'll say, well, hey, we've got to change the plans today. My friend is in town and he's a really interesting person and he's going to share his thoughts with you. And so I caution my students, right, to expect the unexpected, right? So if that's your teaching style, that's my style. And so this would be my advice, saying that early on to your students, getting them to think about what's going to possibly happen in this class next week, okay? Another one, CSBA, I guess, CSBA, okay? Care, share, and be aware, right? And I think that this resonates quite directly with previous presentation, talked quite a bit, right? Mentioned quite a bit about this. And so I, would certainly just leave that for you to think about what do you mean, right? How do you care for your students, right? And again, not just caring for the students, but caring for yourself, right? Sharing as well. And again, sharing stories, okay? And then being aware, keeping those ideas in mind that, well, if a student is struggling, maybe it's because of the learning style, okay? Or there's something else. It's not just what's going on in class, right? So keeping those antennas up with caring, sharing, and be aware, okay? Another strategy, RYT. Remember your teachers, okay? Remember your teachers. And I had a list of names that I can throw up, everyone from elementary school on through when I worked at a Boy Scout camp during the summers and when I was in junior high and high school and into college, my high school teachers, my university teachers, my graduate school teachers, the teachers that I work with now and people that I know. And there's just a tremendous list of people that have had such an amazing influence on my life, have taught me lessons along the way, and this idea too of, who is that teacher, right? Maybe some of you feel mom and dad are teachers. Certainly they are. We learn lessons from them. Coaches, right, are obviously tremendous teachers. And a lot of what my values are and how I bring myself into the classroom is really based on my years running cross country and track and field from when I was in 6th grade all the way up through university. Right. And so, those come to you and the individuals and those faces I can still see. For example, Mrs. Howe. Mrs. Howe was my 6th grade teacher. She was near retirement. She was in her 60s, 59, 60, I think, when I had her. But she was a runner. And here I am as a 11, 12-year-old. And seeing this 59, 60-year-old woman trucking from her house every morning and then back in the afternoon with her backpack on and shuffling. And you know what happened? I got in my mind that if she can run, I can run. And Mrs. Howe was the person who took me to my very first road race, a 5-miler, when I was in 6th grade. And so she has always, had that spot in my heart, near and dear to me in that way. And that was something outside of the classroom. Again, learning from the example, seeing your teacher, and you're going to be seen that way, right? You're going to be seen out of the classroom. So be careful, right? And understand that your actions are also going to be taken with you. But that was a very powerful action. And she set me on my course to be a runner. And then I moved through the coaches that I had in junior high, Coach Ekanaw, and then into high school, Coach Brees, and then Coach Eston at the university that I went to. And all along the way, the way in which they helped me understand how I can be a better runner, how I can be a better teammate in that context as well. I said I worked at a Boy Scout camp for a number of years, and the director of the Scout camp was also an educator. He was a superintendent of a local school district, but he was very much a teacher. And the lessons that we learned and the great stories and the way in which that he taught us to reflect on ourselves and our actions, and that we're part of a greater good, really, in that way. On to college. And I think one of the teachers, and I'm sure she's not watching, but if you are, Dr. Rogers, I probably should thank you. This is one of the lessons that I had. I had a course, my major in university was political science. And I took Dr. Rogers' class for the first time. And I fell into the trap of listening to those who had taken her class before. And a big test was coming up. So they said to me, well, we know how she gives tests. So let's do a group study session. And I said, okay, why not? Let's try it out. I'd never done one before. So I thought, well, but they know her, they understand her. Okay. And I think that was an important lesson because, knowing and understanding, again, is based on our own worldview and our context, right? They maybe felt they understood her, but I obviously didn't understand her in the same way that they understood her, because with that test, I remember sitting down, I got the test, it was about 7 pages in length. I started to look through it. It was in English, but it may as well have been in Korean or Japanese, or it was just all nonsense and garble on the pages. And the thing about a guy sitting next to me, who's a longtime friend of mine also, was really also having trouble with the test. And you could hear him, and I looked over and he's just sweating profusely. And after about 10 minutes, he got up and he just simply left. He didn't write anything on the test, nothing. And I thought, well, I can't do that. So I sat there for the hour and plus and whatever and wrote whatever I could. And of course, I just walked out of that room feeling terrible. Got the test back a couple of days later. The tests, there are 4 tests. So this is going to be 25% of my grade. I'm a political science major. I need to pass this class. I got a 12 out of 100 on the test. I was devastated. And so I went and like all good teachers are, they're counselors and they make themselves available outside of class time to chat with you and to put you on the right course. I sat down with her and I at that time, and well, still, I'm kind of an emotional guy. And I remember I was crying. I was like, my world is shattered. What am I going to do? And she calmly said to me, okay, calm down. What did you do? And I said, well, I did this group study session. And she said, don't do that again. Go back to being yourself, is her message to me. And I did. And the next 3 tests, I got a 96, 97, 98, highest score in the class. Thank you very much. And ended up with an A in the class. And beyond that, though, one of the fateful words that she wrote in one of the, we call them blue books. It's where you write all of your answers. She wrote in there, this is grad school material. And I'd never thought about graduate school prior to that, but obviously she turned me on to that possibility. So again, even your short notes, right? I know sometimes you're going to get overwhelmed reading all this thing. And maybe you do read it all or you skim it all, but you certainly don't have to write extensive comments. You're not going to have time, but come up with something, right? And those were probably the most powerful and fateful words that a teacher has ever shared with me in written form. And I still have the blue book somewhere. I should frame it, I guess, because I went on and got my PhD. And so she had a tremendous impact. And there are others on to graduate school. I could tell stories for hours, but I hope also that you, as you continue to advance, right, and you are able to think back and remember the lessons, the experiences that you had with your teachers, right? CFF. This one is really based in my running, and it comes from my coaches. And I will leave it to you to kind of feel, how would you apply that? to your learning environment. Contact, focus, finish. It's all about running. When you're running, you want to maintain contact with those in front of you. You don't want a gap to become so great that you're not going to overcome it. That requires tremendous focus on your part. And, it's not always how you start, but it's how you finish, right? You've got to have a strong kick, and you've got to be able to push yourself beyond what you thought you were capable of for that, for the rest of that last 100 meters and what you did for the race prior to that. So contact, focus, finish, coming straight out of my running experience, but I feel some of you may be able to apply that to your lessons in your classroom. Another one that's sports-based, but again, how would you look at it? Agility, balance, and flexibility. Agility, balance, and flexibility. How does that connect to your teaching, right? And your teaching style? EAP, evolve, anticipate, and participate. And this is a strategy that comes out of the orientation sessions that I run for our inbound students. And I always feel that as that facilitator, I have to be ready to evolve. Students that I'm taking in now in 2022 are different from the students, well, certainly from those who came in 2019. Absolutely. It's such a stark contrast from the students who came in 2019 to those who are coming in 2022. And never mind then going back to 2010. I first started at Musashi in 2004. And so all this time, right, things have evolved. Students change, generations change, right? We're dealing with a different style of student. So that also means you have to anticipate. You have to be anticipatory in your mindset, okay? Not be reaction, right? Don't be reaction-based, right? Be proactive in that way, but be anticipatory and also participatory, right? Get involved with the students, get your hands dirty, right? Get in there and paint with them, or go out and plant trees with them, whatever you're doing. Take them on hikes or whatever, be a participant, okay, outside of just delivering the lecture. And I'm even meaning this, I don't know where you're all going to end up teaching. Is it more elementary or junior high? But university students need that as well, right? They need teachers, right? Educators who participate, right? And don't just simply walk in and deliver a lecture and walk out and then get so trapped into their own research that they don't want to interact with students, right? So another one for you to think about. This one, connect very directly to the previous presentation, this idea of having a child's eye. And as you can see, I took this from a magazine called Child Art. And the situation, I highly recommend you read the article, but this picture was juxtaposed with a picture or a drawing that was done by an adult as to how they were seeing the future of the city of Brisbane. And the writer of this article, Sohail Inatola, who would be considered, I guess, in Japanese, we call him senpai. We're connected because we both went to the University of Hawaii. We studied under Professor Dater, but we never met until very, very recently. Actually, during the pandemic, I reached out to him. But a lot of what I teach and materials I use are from Professor Inatola. And he talks about how the child, comparing the two drawings, the child puts themselves in the drawing, right? And so again, putting ourselves out there, putting ourselves in the education process, okay? And reminding ourselves that, hey, why not get out a piece of paper and some color markers? I do that with my students when I talk about how they're envisioning the future of the university or the future of their community. I simply bring in markers and I throw blank pieces of paper and I said, draw. And I've got some tremendous pictures, okay, from that. So don't be afraid to have them and go back to being a child. This is another thing that I see here in Japan when it comes to education. My students need to go back to being elementary school students, because as they go through the stereotypical, the common way that a student goes through the education process in Japan is elementary school is wonderful, right? Everything is open. You try all things, but as you get in, especially in the exam system here, and some of you may relate to this, right? It starts to squeeze, right? And you only need to remember what you need to know for the test, right? Not critical thinking, not exploration, not being original. You definitely do not need to be original in taking entrance exams here in Japan, right? But when they get to me, and after having 6 years of being unoriginal in some cases, and looking to the teacher for the answer, I tell them, you have to go back to being elementary school student. You've got to bring out that inner child, right? And you've got to be, like I said earlier, prepared to make mistakes, be ridiculous as well. So the child's eye, extremely important in that way. JO, this gets to this idea of just one, okay, which was also talked about. Again, I love the connection between our two presentations, and it wasn't planned at all. We've never met, we didn't coordinate, and this is how life happens, right? But this idea of just one, and this goes back to my first teaching experience at the university level at the University of Hawaii. I was basically a student teacher in that way, my first formal teaching at the university, and I was teaching, I think it was US-Japan relations. And after a few weeks, one of the students came to my office, local kid, grew up in Oahu on the island there. And, he was just a fascinating individual. And he came to me one day and he said, I just want to thank you because nobody has ever taught me to think. Right. And it was just such a powerful burst of energy, right? And I thought, wow, here he is, maybe 19, 20 years old, gone through the education system in Hawaii, and nobody ever taught him to think in that way. And so, that ever since that time, I'm a just oneer. Just one person, whether it's in my class, whether it's in orientation, whether it's here today, right? And I don't know how many, we've got 165 participants. So I hope I can at least reach one of you in that way, right? But that's my strategy, right? Just one, and focusing on the power of one. And finally, you teach you, YTU, okay? You teach you. And that means find your fit, right? Find what you're good at, okay? If you're not a good lecturer, don't lecture. Figure out a different way to do things, right? But you've got to be true to how you want to teach. Don't teach for others, and don't look to mentors and try to, copy them or mimic them. That's not helpful. Now, there may be parts that you would like to bring, but don't bring the whole image, right? Don't bring the whole package with you, right? Do yourself, right? You do you is often heard. Sometimes it's not put in a positive light, but this idea of you teach you, right? Find a way in which you want to teach and be comfortable. Because if you're not comfortable in front of the students, they know, right? They know when you're not. You, okay? So you teach you, right? So what will your educational strategies be, right? Consider them maybe over the next day or so here as you're having conversations. Send me your emails. If you ever come to Japan, feel free to look me up. I'm at Musashi University. Love to have you. Come and visit. And so, in conclusion, what is your title? Again, I'm going to send a Google link. I want to hear from all of you. I'd love to see those titles. So please send me your suggestions. Thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to questions. Thank you.
So there you have it, our ever dynamic associate professor from Musashi University, Japan, Dr. Brian J. Masshardt. Thank you so much, Dr. Brian, for the humorous yet informative speech.
Humor is important. Humor is important.
It was very interesting to listen to your experience in teaching and living in Japan, as well as your teaching strategies. And to our YouTube audience, don't forget to fill in the Google form link given in the chat box. And with that, for our delegates, let us proceed with the question and answer portion. So if you have any questions regarding Dr. Brian's talk, you may raise your hand and voice out your questions, or type your questions in our chat box. So because of the time limit, we will be answering only one question. Please, our delegates, do you have any questions?
They should answer my questions. I gave you questions. You should be answering those, right? Tell me your answers to the questions.
Yeah, you can ask questions or tell your answers.
So for our delegates, you can also raise your hand and voice out your questions for Dr. Brian, or if you want to answer Dr. Brian's question.
Well, I'm going to look forward to seeing your ideas on what I should have called this talk, okay? So please have a good think on that. And if I guess, I can always coordinate with the organizers, and if you don't send in a suggestion, you won't get your certificate. So.
Okay, so I don't see any questions, but to our delegates, if you have any questions later, you can write it in the chat box and our team will pass it to Dr. Brian through email, okay? So again, thank you so much, Dr. Brian.
My pleasure, thank you. It was wonderful. Enjoy the rest of the symposium.
Yes, so this is the end of the second session. YouTube audience, I hope to see you in the third talk. Bye-bye. And to our Zoom audience, please stay online. It's not the end for you yet.
So on behalf of the management, we thank you for your presence and effort, Dr. Brian. We appreciate the time and the significant contribution you have given us today. I hope everyone has received good input and would put it to good use in the future. And with that, we proceed